Hello, welcome to the 4th grade STAAR Writing information. My name is Maureen Nicholas. I am the lead eye coach for elementary language arts. I hope that this presentation will be helpful so that you will learn how the STAAR test is constructed, what are the different components, and how does it work for our students, and what can we do in our instruction to help our students. Let's continue. Sometime during the presentation you might have a question about the STAAR test. Maybe you have come with some questions already written down. As we go through it, please feel free to go ahead and write those questions down, and my expectation is by the end of this presentation many of those questions will be answered. Let's go ahead and continue. The writing test for STAAR. How is it constructed? Well, it's going to be 2 days. 2 days full of writing. The first day is going to happen sometime in April, the first week in April, and the students will be expected to write on 26 lines paper, and they were either in an expository or a personal narrative type of way. And in addition to that, they will have some selections there to read, and those selections they're supposed to edit and revise the papers that are in the part of those selections. One day will be a personal narrative with about 14 to 18 questions. The next day could be expository. We don't know exactly which one will come first, but you will have between 14 to 18 types of multiple choice questions to answer along with 2 or 3 selections. And why do we have the writing test? Well, the state tells us it's a broader measure of writing at each grade level, requiring students to write 2 compositions, one being the expository and the other being the personal narrative. They're weighted equally, and there's no gatekeeper. So a student can do well on the compositions and do well on the multiple choice, and they will pass. They may not do so well on the compositions and do well, meet a certain criteria on the multiple choice, and that way, and they will pass. So there's no gatekeeper like it was in tax, where you had to get at least a score .2 to pass in conjunction with the multiple choice. So we're going to look at the personal narrative as TEA has defined it. It's an expressive literary piece written in first person that centers on a particular event in the author's life and may contain vivid description as well as personal commentary and observations. We'll go to the tech level. Students are to write about important personal experiences. Personal narratives must be realistic in nature, and there shouldn't be any obvious fantasy papers. The fantasy papers would be things that are not plausible, things that could not have happened, things that are not believable. For example, Martians coming to Earth, a student getting married when they're in 4th grade, and those type of papers have been read by TEA, and they consider those to be unbelievable fantasy papers. If students write in that way, they will be given a score .1, considered a very limited writing performance. They need to write about something realistic that the reader can believe could have happened. The personal narrative prompt. We're going to look at it and how it's scaffolded. But all the personal narrative prompts will have read, then they will have a box, and inside the box they will either have a drawing or a photograph, and then they will be given a truism or a statement to get them to think about, to narrow that, and then they'll be given the charge, which shows them what to write about. Then there'll be some little reminders. They're called be sure to's that will help them remind them of things that they need to write in their writing. So here's an example. Look at the picture. You see 2 little girls, and within the picture is a photograph actually. They are to look at that and say, okay, you have 2 little girls here, now what does it have to do with me? Well, then you look at the truism or the statement that goes below it, and that is going to narrow the topic. Friends are an important part of our lives, so we see 2 little girls together, we know they're friends because they're together and they're smiling, most likely they're friends. So friends are an important part of our lives. What is the charge? Where are they supposed to write? Write about a time you spent with a friend, and that's what they're supposed to do. That's their charge. Sometimes the students get lost in the photograph and think that they have to write about 2 little girls, even though they may not have had that experience, or that they had to write about a time and why friends are important in their lives. That was just to get them to think, to create a stimulus in the brain to help them with ideas. But the charge is the right part. Write about a time you spent with a friend. Be sure to write about a personal experience, organize your writing, develop your ideas in detail, choose your words carefully, use correct spelling, capitalization, punctuation, grammar, and sentences. And so I have an example from the TEA scoring guide that was released in March of last year, this last school year, from the 2012 testing calendar. So I'm going to go ahead and read it, and this is considered an accomplished reading performance. An accomplished writing performance. We're off to victory camp. I chanted, flinging my arms up in the air. We jumped into the bus and sped away. Victory camp was about 4 hours away, so we were in for a long road trip. After hours of sitting and sleeping on each other's shoulders, we were finally there. Emily, Kaylee, and Amy and I dropped out of our bus and tugged on our counselor, Miss Thelma, to check us in. When we got to the front desk, the workers gave us orange wristbands so they know whose group you're in. Then they gave us a chart with all of our activities on it. First up was the rowboats. We ran to the pond and jumped in the rowboat. Only 2 people in a boat, yelled the man in the life vest. Emily and I hopped in the hot pink one with the white stripe down the middle. We started paddling. We paddled to the middle of the pond and stopped. We wanted to enjoy the wonderful view until we started sinking. Help, Emily and I cried. The man on the dock hollered to us. Just pedal. We obeyed the man and pedaled. Pedal for your life, I hollered. When we reached the dock, we hopped out of the boat and plopped on the grass, taking deep breaths. When everyone was finished, Emily and I sprinted to the cabin. We laid on our bunk bed and laughed. You know, that was actually, I interrupted, the best time I've ever had. So this gives you an example of the personal narrative and what's expected from the kids if they're going to get an accomplished writing performance. A very, very decent piece of writing. Now I'm going to jump to expository writing. And the Texas Education Agency, in the text glossary, defines it as a type of informational text that clarifies or explains something. I want you to think about the word explanatory. I have a particular belief about something that's true for me, and I need to explain why. So it's about explaining why. First of all, what do you believe to be true, and why do you believe it to be true for yourself? So it's about finding that topic, that central idea, and explaining it. And if we're going to look at it from the prompt level, it's a little different from the personal narrative in that there will be a box of information, but it won't be a photograph or a drawing. It will be an example of something, and then it will be narrowed in the next sentence, and then you have your charge where it says write. That's what the students are supposed to do, and it's scaffolded from general to specific so that it can serve as a stimulus for the brain to think of ideas. I want to go back to this real quick. The students may write in first person in this expository task, but it's also okay to write in second person. Expository prompts contain a stimulus and are scaffolded. You have the read, think, write, and be sure to. The purpose is to help students build a concept that they might write about and to provide students with important reminders. And the reminders are the be sure to. So here's what one looks like. Here's your example. The read. Read the information in the box. Notice it's not a photograph or a drawing, but it's an example, and I will read it out loud. When he was 8 years old, a boy named Paul Hogan watched firefighters quickly put out a small fire that he had accidentally started. He decided right then and there that he would become a firefighter someday, and he did. Think about the adults you know and what kinds of jobs they do. So it's narrowing the topic. Here's the example. Paul Hogan was a firefighter. Some of the kids get confused with that, and if they're not given the explicit instruction of how to read it and how the author constructed it, and they might think they have to write about being a firefighter when in fact they may not want to be a firefighter when they grow older. So you have your think about adults you know, stimulating the brain, what kinds of jobs they do. Okay, my mom's a nurse, my dad, he works for the fire department, or my mom's a nurse, or my dad's a teacher, whatever happens to be. My uncle is a policeman, whatever. Then they think about that. So that sort of gives them some thoughts about, okay, who are some people that I can emulate, that I want to be like when I grow up. Now here's your charge, the write. Write about a job you would like to have when you grow up. It's going to be 2 sentences. And this is the task. Explain what the job is and why you want to do it. It's important to read both those sentences to understand it thoroughly. What is the task? What is the charge? So write about a job you'd like to have, but what are you going to do with that? Explain what the job is and why you want to do it. And here are your reminders. Be sure to clearly state your central idea. Well, Your central idea, that is going to be expository. Organize your writing straight from the rubric. Develop your writing in detail. Choose your words carefully. Use correct spelling, capitalization, punctuation, grammar, and sentences. So here's an example from the TA scoring guide that received an accomplished writing performance. This is an example of an expository writing using that same prompt of writing about something you would like to be when you grow up and explaining why. When I was 7 years old, I watched the Olympics with my dad. We watched the swimmers, and they were fast. When I saw how fast they were going, I knew someday I'll go to the Olympics and swim my heart out, and I'll win the gold medal. I know I'll go to the Olympics because I've been swimming since I was 4 years old. I can swim 25 yards easy peasy. My parents say I go as fast as lightning. I bet I could go 1 or 2 miles an hour in the pool. Also, I've already gotten 3 blue ribbons. I want to go to the Olympics because if I win a gold medal, or if I win a medal, it could get me excellent scholarships for great colleges. I could win trophies, and if I need to, I can trade it in for money and give it to my life insurance. My parents would be so proud of me. Being in the water makes me feel so joyful and happy. I have so much fun with my family in the pool. Swimming also gives you great exercise. And if I've had a stress-filled day, a lap or two will calm me down. In conclusion, I'm a super swimmer, and I enjoy every minute of it. And after I go to the Olympics, I can join a swim team. Later on, I can become a professional. Then when I'm ready, I can go back to the Olympics. This serves as an example of what an expository writing would look like in a 4th grade level and what some students are writing. So basically, when you're looking at the prompts, you'll have the prompts being about a half a page long and inside that in length, and then you will see in the middle of it about halfway down to 3/4 the way down, there's going to be a little bit of space, and that's used for planning. And the students may write on this page. They may circle, underline, highlight, whatever that is allowable as far as highlighters are concerned, but depends on the school and what's allowable. But having said that, they're allowed to write on that page and use that page as a part of their planning. Then they're given a back side of that page and another front side of the next page, and those are considered 2.5 or 2 1/4 pages to plan. It's very important that our students plan out their work, they revise and they edit on this piece, because then they will have another separate page, and that page will be 26 lines in a box. And the box is boxed around. You have 26 lines. The students are to write on those 26 lines, not outside the box, because the people who read this are trained not to read outside the box, and to use these lines judiciously. Some students, because they want to write more, may add lines inside the box. Well, the people who read it will only read up into the 26th line. If the student added those lines or not, it will just be 26 lines. So the next thing that I'd like to talk to you about is the writing of a title. Some people believe that the students have to write a title, and if they don't write a title, they will be taken off in the rubric. Well, there's nothing in the rubric that says that you have to have a title or you must include it. Sometimes students will include a title because it will help anchor their thinking, and that's fine as long as they don't take up 5 lines to write that title. So in other words, if that's what the student needs to anchor their thinking, they can use it, but the people in TEA are trained not to read the title, but to read the whole piece, what's inside that. It's okay if they want to write a title, but it's not mandatory. And it's important to have different little conferences with our students to decide, how am I going to use those 26 lines? How am I going to use the planning pages to help me, and then to put my writing on 26 lines. For some students, it's not a problem to use the 26 lines. They don't have to use all of the 26 lines. Some might use 24, some might use 22. But the important thing is to use that paper and those lines in a way that you're not wasting anything, that we have an economy of language. Everything is used for a particular purpose. The skipping of lines, the doubling the title, that takes away from those 26 lines, and those are good conversations to have with the students. So the STAAR writing rubric, what is it? Well, there's different score points and different levels. There's very limited, basic writing performance, satisfactory, and accomplished writing performance. Of course, when we're looking at this, we're looking at, our students being in the satisfactory and accomplished level. Some of our students may very well be right now in the very limited and the basic, but in order to be grade level, next grade level ready, and accomplished writers, satisfactory writers, we'd like our students to be this right now. and going into January, February, March of next year, as well as when they leave in June, to be at this level so that they're next grade level ready and we can move them further along. And we always talk about T24, but we want to make sure that they're college ready as well as next grade level ready. So when we look at the scoring model, how is it scored and what is this thing called adjacent scoring? Maybe you've heard that. Well, in the tax model, it was called perfect agreement, where two people would read the paper separately, they would give them a score, and if the two scores coincided, then that score would be agreed, that's the score that it would be. So for example, score A gives it a 3, score B gives it a 3. They don't grade it together, they grade it separately, and so the score would be a 3. Now, if scorer A received a 3, gave it a 3, and scorer B gave it a 2, they wouldn't be in perfect agreement. They would go for a third score, and the third score would score it, and whatever score that went with A or B, they went with. So sometimes if you looked at some of the data back then, you would see one student may be given a score 0.3, but you see 3 people scored it, and you would see 3, 2, 3. It's because they asked that third person to come in and help them score. Now the STAAR way of doing it is called adjacent scoring, and it's called adjacent scoring because they will be scoring side by side separately, but that both their scores will count as long as it's not more than, if it's more than 1 point in disagreement, then you score a third person, and a third person, their scores will be doubled. So I'll explain that. Number 1, scorer A gives it a 3, scorer B gives it a 3. The child now will receive a satisfactory writing performance, but instead of being a 3, it'll be a 6 because you would combine the two. Scorer A reads another paper, gives it a 2. Scorer B gives it a 3. The student receives a 5, okay, because it's between the two scoring performances. And I'll talk to you about that in a minute. Now, what happens if a scorer A gives it a 1 and scorer B gives it a 3? Well, there's 2 points between those two. And so then if that would happen, and it might happen on your campus, because we're going to ask you to adjacently score. If that happened in TEA, they would ask for a third person to come, and that third person would score, and they would multiply that person's score by 2. Most of the time you don't have that big discrepancy of 2 points or more, but if you do, and they do, they have a third person score it, and then whatever they see they have as a score, because they're considered an expert scorer, they multiply it by 2. And this is what it would look like. And that's why now, instead of having the way we used to just score was 4, 3, 2, and 1, now we have it in an adjacently scored way. So you have 2 scorers, and the combination is what the child receives. So if it's a 0 or non-scorable, 0, 0 would be a 0. If it's non-scorable, it's non-scorable. It meets the criteria of you can't read it, it's illegible, student didn't respond, or it's in another language other than the language of the test. So those are what you need to think about when you're scoring yours for this first round of the benchmarks. So if a student received a 1 from one scorer or 1 from another, they're both considered very limited. It would receive a score 0.2, which would go into the range of very limited performance. And then you have the in-betweens. The in-betweens. So a 1 and a 2, the 1, 2 papers, the score to 1, score to 2 is 3. And what is that considered? Between very limited and basic. And then if you had someone receive a 2, another one receive a 2, it's a 4. Basically, it's basic writing performance. And so we go all the way down to an 8. So your scores that you would have if you adjacently score will go from a scale of 0, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There wouldn't be a 1 because if it's non-scorable, it's non-scorable. Okay? So you would go from 0, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And that is what we consider this from the state. And that's what we found that they are calling this adjacent scoring. So let's just go over basically some information from Victoria Young, and she's the director of testing for ELA, for writing and social studies, I believe. And so this is the presentation. She gave us the latest information. So what drives the scoring from the state? Well, responsiveness to the purpose and to the topic. Now, sometimes the students may respond to the topic, but not respond in the genre that's being asked. They might respond in a narrative when it's asking for expository or vice versa. Or they might respond appropriately to the genre, but not address the prompt. And if that happens, they will receive a lower score, not a 3 or a 4, which we talked about that a 3, which is a 6, or a 4, which is an 8 when it's adjacently scored, or a 7 in between that. If they receive that, those are considered quality type of scores. But if you're talking about very limited to basic, that is not next grade level ready. So that would be the reason why students would receive that. In addition to that, we're looking at focus. Focus is weakened, and you have the lower score papers when the details or events do not further the reader's understanding. You might have unnecessary adjectives and adverbs, make it real flowery, but it doesn't contribute to the storyline. It doesn't contribute to the expository piece. When we're talking about narrative, we're talking about the bed to bed, where the student tells you every single thing they did that day from the time they got up to the time they went to sleep, and that doesn't move the paper forward, doesn't help the reader understand it better. It's just a list. It separates the storyline from the extension and reflection. That's another thing. The student may be having something in their story, but they're trying to reflect in it, but the reflection didn't go well with what the storyline was. So those two didn't match, and it leaves the reader a little befuddled and confused. So we have also, when we're talking about expository writing, they don't have a central idea established, or they sort of find it at the end, and that is confusing to the reader. They don't have a central statement, or they have several, and that weakens the thesis of the paper, or that central idea. We talk about progression of ideas, what is required, one sentence linking to another sentence, one idea linking to another. If they're lower, you won't see that connectedness, and transitions would be a big problem, or they will use transitions in a perfunctory type of way, which means, oh, well, first you do this, and next you do this, and last you do this, and those are their connectors, but they, by themselves, if you didn't really use them, they really don't move the writing to where you want them to move and to have the purpose that transitions do. Allow the reader to understand it better. So if you have those types that are called perfunctory, where, you know, if you had them, great. If you didn't have them, great. It just really doesn't make much of a difference in the paper. First, second, third. My first reason. My second reason. Why do you have to tell the reader? The reader can figure it out what the first and the second one is, by using a better transition and a smoother transition. So those are the types of things that lower papers were scored with, those type of patterns. And what we see is that clusters of ideas aren't linked to one another. They're linked to the prompt, but they're not linked to one another. It's important to have that cohesiveness. And because of that, it's a roadblock to substance, depth, and thoughtfulness. One idea builds on another idea. And if it's not going that way, it's not flowing that way, you'll have a disconnected way of reading. And what effect does it have on the reader? They don't get it. They don't understand it. So they would probably get a 2 or even a 1. We talk about development. You have 26 lines, and we have planning pages. It's important that the students use those planning pages to plan and revise and edit, and then take it onto that line paper. We have to talk about the big ideas, the narrowing and developing those ideas, not having a ton of ideas, like 5 or 6 or 7 ideas, but narrowing them down to what's most important, which, you know, Victoria Young always talks about the economy of language, building the meaning from one idea to the next, but using those lines in the most judicious way possible. And when we talk about development, sometimes in those lower scoring papers, you might see a formulaic type of approach, to where the students follow the 5-paragraph essay, where, okay, I have an introduction, I have to state what the prompt says, and then I have to write three paragraphs here, and this one has to state, well, the first reason is, and the next reason is, and the last reason, and okay, my conclusion basically is just going to go ahead and repeat what my introduction and says, and that, you know, they can't go and make their own ideas on there, because they have to follow that structure in this formula instead of creating their own structure to make it work for them. And so that impedes the understanding of the reader into getting into an accomplished or getting into a satisfactory writing performance. The best development is real, based on the student's own experiences and thinking about the world, basically. So there are some problems with space problems. They maybe write an introduction that's really, really flowery that goes on forever. Your conclusions repeat the introduction. You have repetition of words, and then, the ideas are repeated is really random and haphazard. They're using descriptive language, which is great, but it really doesn't go with what the writer's trying to convey. Using space effectively requires both planning and revision, and that's why we always ask the students to plan on those 2 pages so that they can get those kinks out, and then onto the line paper will be a better product for the reader. So how is it scored? Revision and editing is combined, and they go with the compositional. So basically, you are going to have 30% of the test comes from revision, 68% comes from editing. Now, that's when we look at it just from this point of view. Okay, 9 questions will come from revision. 19 questions will come from editing. So if you base those 2 as a part of the test, just the revision and editing and revision multiple choice part, you're looking at 9 from revision, 19 from editing. You bring them together, 32% comes from revision of that portion, and 68 comes from that portion. And what we do is we combine those 28 questions with 16 points. Well, where do these 16 points come from? Remember, everything's adjacently scored. So if I have a personal narrative, 2 people are going to score it, they're going to give their score, and the maximum a student could get would be 8 for the personal narrative, 4 and 4. Everyone see that? So then we go to the expository. 2 people are going to score it, adjacently scored. The maximum could be 8 points because you have 4 and a 4. Maximum. You put 28 plus 16 from the compositions, you get 44 possible points. All right, so we talked about where these come from. You have multiple choice part of the test. You have 5 field test questions which don't count. This is only for what counts. And so we get a score of 44 points. Okay, so when we're looking at this, I have some questions. So how does this all work together? Think of it as being based on 44 points. So as we go through 28 questions plus, we have here 28 questions plus 16 from the 28 questions from multiple choice plus the compositions equals to 44 possible points. And so that's how we come to that 44. So if we were to break it down for the whole test, how are the compositions weighted compared to how are the compositions weighted compared to the multiple choice? Well, 36% of the test is weighted with the compositions, and 64% is weighted with the multiple choice. So let's give a scenario. Maybe the question that's popping out of your head right now is, okay, so I get all of that, but what's passing? Okay, if you're talking about raw score and you're combining the 2, I'm going to give you a scenario, but I want you to consider this as we're considering the scenario. Student is going to need this year, because we're still in phase 1, a 23 raw score. 23 raw score. In order to be academic, to get the different performances, the unsatisfactory is 22 and below. Okay, and so in order to pass, they're going to need 23 to 35. We'll get the student there. So let's go ahead and go over some scenario. Jennifer Starr, she had received 12 questions out of 19 correct, and she received 5 out of 9 from the revision. So you add 12 and 5, that's 17, and then she received a 5, okay, a 5 for satisfactory writing performance. She was between basic and satisfactory, so a 3 and a 2 on her personal narrative. So 17 and 5 is 22. And then she received a 6. 22 and 6 is 28. So her raw score is a 28. Did she pass? Yes. Probably the next question is, okay, well, how well did she do? So I'm going to go ahead and go over it again. She answered 17 multiple choice questions correctly, received a 5 on the personal narrative. That brings us to 22, and 6 on expository. That gives her 28 out of 44. And so what I want to talk to you about is, where does she fall between advanced, satisfactory, and unsatisfactory? Well, she's in the satisfactory range, because in order to be advanced, you need a 36 raw score and above. So I want to talk to you about the cut scores, the levels. Well, level 1 was unsatisfactory, so it goes from 0 to 22. And then 23 to 35 is your level 2, which is satisfactory. and level 3 is advanced. So she would need to score higher to have 36 to 44 to get academic performance, advanced academic performance. So if you're talking about advanced academic performance, that's what we'd love all our kids to be, because they have a great ability to think critically, they have a high likelihood of success in the next grade level with little or no academic intervention. We look at satisfactory, they're a reasonable likelihood of success in the next grade level or course, but it may need some short-term targeted academic intervention. If they're unsatisfactory, indicates that students are inadequately prepared for the next grade level and are unlikely to succeed in the next grade or course without significant and ongoing academic intervention. So this is what was released from the state last year, the raw score conversion table. And phase 1 has been added to this year as well. So we're in phase 1. If you look at phase 1, this is where we are. And if you were below 23, which is 22 to 0, as in a raw score, you'd be unsatisfactory. If you were level 2, you would be at a 35 to a 23. And that would be considered satisfactory, or if you were at a raw score of a 36 to 44, it would be considered advanced academic performance. And these are the scores I was just talking to you about. The unsatisfactory, 22 and below, which is 50% on the test, you'd be, or below, you'd be unsatisfactory. If you had 23 out of 35, 23 out of 44, the lowest is 52, and that is considered passing, and it goes up to 80% if you were to round it. They would need a 36 out of 44 or above, which is an 81 to 100% to be considered advanced academic performance. Now, that's how things are scored. And we didn't talk about the rubric. That'll be another presentation. We can look at this from a scoring guide that is available from TEA in English as well as in Spanish. Here are some information, some resources. Victoria Young, you have her email if you have any questions for her. This will take you directly to some of the resources, as well as there's a number if you have any questions. You may email me or your iCoach if you have any other questions. And thank you for listening, and hopefully this was helpful for you. My name is Maureen Ucles. I'm from the Department of, well, I used to be from the Department of Teaching and Learning, and now I'm from Curriculum and Instruction. But my email is maureen.ucles@springbranchist.com. I look forward to hearing from you, and thank you so much.